Hello and welcome to another Atypling Philosopher video. Today I'm going to speak to you a little bit more about the Nativity because, hey, it's that time of year. And I'll be drawing from my quite magnificent book, The Nativity, A Critical Examination, which I think is a book that all human beings on Earth should buy. Actually, everyone should buy about 10 copies. You don't need to read any of them, just get the 10 copies. I'm going to talk. So I talked to you yesterday about the census. Check out my other videos. I'm doing a sort of not a particularly chronological skip through the nativity accounts. I'm just picking different problems with them. And today I'm going to concentrate on something that happens after the census has brought down Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem to give birth to Jesus, and after the Magi have been and visited. Now, just to remind you, there are only 2 nativity accounts. They happen in only 2 of our 5 sources, so Paul and the Gospels. They happen in only Matthew and Luke. And Matthew and Luke have 2 completely different stories going towards the birth of Jesus. So the stories, Luke is bringing Joseph and Mary down from Nazareth with a census so that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Actually, Matthew already has Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem, but then has Magi coming from the east to pick up Herod to chase Matthew's Jesus and Joseph and Mary to Egypt. So we have Herod killing the innocents in and around Bethlehem so that Matthew's Jesus runs away to Egypt, where they hang out for a couple of years and then come back to Nazareth. Luke, on the other hand, has them coming down for a census in Bethlehem and then straight away afterwards returning via Jerusalem to Nazareth. We have 2 utterly different stories here that are simply not compatible. As I said, I've talked to you about the census and how nonsensical the census is. I'm going to talk about this 2-year sojourn in Egypt. What you've got to remember is Matthew's audience is predominantly a Jewish audience. So he is trying to tick all the Jewish boxes in an intention that he's as persuasive as possible to his audience. His audience are Jews, so he needs Jesus to be the best Jew there is. The best Jew there is arguably Moses. He's the one who delivers the law. We have Jesus becoming the new Moses, delivering a new covenant, a new law to Christians, to the followers of Jesus. And Matthew is trying to convince his Jewish audience to become followers of Jesus. So he is portraying Jesus as the new Moses. Out of Israel, I will call my son Israel. So Moses came out of Egypt. Jesus is to come out of Egypt. How can we get Jesus into Egypt? Well, we can have Herod being the new Pharaoh, killing the firstborn, killing these innocents, mapping out that old Moses story that we saw in the book of Exodus. We have Herod being brought along by the Magi from the east, killing those children, and in so doing, scaring Joseph and Mary off to Egypt so that they can come out of Egypt. Now, what we hear here is that, well, I'll read you actually from Matthew chapter 2. Verse 13 onwards. I'll miss out a little bit in the middle. And I'll let you know when. Now, when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him." So you have the warning from angelic beings, or a dream sequence, telling Joseph and Mary to go to Egypt and remain there. So there is some time that's spent in Egypt here. Continuing verse 14. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. It's a real clandestine operation, running away. This is really quite an evocative moment, fleeing to another country. This is a big deal. Remember that. He remained there until the death of Herod. Again, some time is passing here. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. This is to fulfill a prophecy. I mean, that much is obvious because it says it. It's not because it just happened. It's designed, this whole event is designed to fulfill a prophecy. And then later in verse 19 onwards, but when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus, so Archelaus is Herod the Great's son, or one of his sons, who's now tetrarch of Judea. He's in charge of the area now that Herod has died, and he is in charge of that area for 10 years. And in fact, 10 years later, the Romans said, you've done a pretty bad job of ruling, so we're going to take over the province. So that's why we're going to have a census. This is why Luke and Matthew, as I said in the last video, cannot be harmonious. They are not a cohesive pair of accounts. They are two completely different accounts separated by a 10 to 11 year time period. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee. So this is Matthew saying that he'd never lived in Galilee before. The inference here is that this is the first time they'd been to Galilee. So he left for the regions of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. Now, you wouldn't say he came and lived in a city called Nazareth if he'd already been living in Nazareth before they went to Bethlehem, which is what Luke says. Luke says they live in Nazareth, come down for a census, and then return to Nazareth. Right? It's Nazareth, Bethlehem, Nazareth. Matthew has them living in Bethlehem already, and this is where we are alerted by Matthew that they go to live in Nazareth for the first time. It's a very clear inference here. I'll read it again. So after being warned by God in a dream, he left, so Joseph left for the regions of Galilee, so introducing the reader to the idea that there's this region Galilee, and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. Oh, here's Nazareth. I'm going to come and live here. Very, very clearly the first time this family have been to Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. And I'll talk about the problems with that in another video. But the issues are that these two stories, Luke and Matthew, are completely irreconcilable. But it's a little bit worse than that. As if you can get worse than completely irreconcilable. Completely and utterly irreconcilable. You have Matthew clearly saying that Joseph and Mary are going to live in Egypt for a couple of years, or for an extended period of time. Most people guess about a couple of years, because you've got Herod still alive, slaughtering the innocents, continuing living, and then at some point dying. And then you have his son, after a period of however long, becoming tetrarch and taking over Judea, and this then being recognized as a safe place. So people estimate that period to be about 2 years. So Jesus is living in Egypt for 2 years. This is not mentioned anywhere else outside of Matthew. It's utterly bizarre that Jesus living in a foreign country after being chased away by a murderous king. So imagine we write a story of your life, right? You, the viewer. And imagine when you were a child, right? You were seen as so important by the king or president of wherever you live now. You were seen as such a threat to their very existence that the king or president chased you from where you live now to a foreign country where you lived for 2 years, and then God appeared to you in a dream, or angels appeared to you in a dream, and delivered a message, first of all, that you were in danger, and second of all, that it was now safe, and allowed you, predicted that there would be safe passage back to the country you were originally living in. Now imagine someone was writing an account of your life, right? You now, and didn't include that. That's bizarre, because that strikes me. It's actually a little bit worse than that, because in coming out of Egypt, you are fulfilling a messianic prophecy, right? So this is an indication that you, coming out of whatever country you're living in, are some kind of Messiah. Anyone writing an account of your life that doesn't include that, well, that's just really weird. And the only understandable reason for not including that account is if you didn't know that account. Really. So I think Paul didn't know that account. I think Mark didn't know that account. I think Luke didn't know that account. We get into an interesting scenario. Okay, what's going on with John? Why does John include neither of these birth narratives? Maybe John's looking at all of the birth narratives in some of the non-canonical texts, or maybe John is looking at those two birth narratives and going, they don't cohere with each other. They're clearly made up. I'm not going to include them. And in fact, John's also doing something slightly different, because he says in the beginning was the word, right? The Logos. So is John saying, I don't really need Jesus being born in some kind of miraculous human incarnation, because that's devaluing who I think Jesus is. So where Matthew, Mark and Luke are, in my opinion, arguing that Jesus is the Messiah, so he's fulfilling all these messianic prophecies. For John, Jesus isn't a Messiah, which is sort of a really important divine human, like a superhuman in Jewish religious terms. For John, Jesus is God. So he's making a step change here. He's saying, right, maybe he's saying, because it's interesting as to why he doesn't include the birth narratives, either of the birth narratives. They're completely different. He could pick one of them and go with it, but he doesn't include any of them. Instead, he very clearly starts with, in the beginning was the Word. In other words, Jesus pre-existed his human incarnation. So I don't need to talk about his actual human birth, because it devalues in some sense who I think he is. So that's what I think is going on with John. Matthew and Luke, on the other hand, have two completely separate accounts, and Luke doesn't include anything about going to Egypt. And as I say, that's a massive problem. What does Luke do? Well, he has them coming down from Nazareth to Bethlehem for the census, and then this. So straight away, this is what happens with Luke. So this is Luke chapter 2, and from verse 22 onwards. So 21 onwards. And when 8 days were completed, so that it was time for his circumcision, he was also named Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. So, and when 8 days were completed, right? It's really important. So they are in Bethlehem. 8 days have been completed since birth, right? In Matthew's account, you've got actually quite a long wait from... some people think that the Magi visit Jesus after he's months, maybe even over a year old. Okay, so he's been in Bethlehem for that long that the Magi turn up eventually and give praise. Luke's account is entirely different. He's been born, and when 8 days were completed, so that it is time for his circumcision. And then it goes on, verse 22, and when the days for their purification according to the law of Moses were completed, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. and to offer a sacrifice according to what has been stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young doves. So then they meet Simeon in Jerusalem and have this. There's a little sort of sidebar, and Anna, prophetess Anna. So there's a little interaction with them, and then it goes very clearly afterwards, verse 39 onwards. And when his parents had completed everything in accordance with the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. So he's very clearly saying this is their own city. In other words, they'd already lived there. Remember, Matthew says they come to Galilee and to a city of Nazareth. Luke very clearly says, no, they're just going back to their own city, where they already come from. But it's the causal connectives, these temporal conjunctions that are used. And when. So if I say something like, when I went to the shops, or no, when I got back from work, I went to the shops, right? When I got back from work, I went to the shops. What that tells you is or what it implies is that as soon as I got back from work, I went to the shops. What it cannot mean is when I got back from the shops, so when I got back from work, I went to the shops. What it cannot mean is when I got back from work, I went for 2 years to Egypt, and then I went to the shops. There's just no way that you can use language like that. Okay. So what Christian apologists try to do, or pretty much all Christians try to do, is in trying to harmonize these two accounts, they have to get Jesus and Mary and Joseph at some point between birth and going to the temple in Jerusalem, or from the temple in Jerusalem to Nazareth. They need to get him going to Egypt for 2 years without even mentioning Herod and his murderous intentions, and without mentioning the Magi. You can't do it. You cannot do it and keep a straight face. You cannot go, oh yeah, Luke's just, he's got a different agenda and he's not thinking about the Magi and Herod. It's just not important to Luke that he includes Jesus's life being in danger and lots of babies being slaughtered by the king, the murderous king, and being praised by some really important people from the East. That's not important. However, what is important is that Jesus goes to the temple to get circumcised. That's super important. So I'm going to include that. And the way I'm going to include it is by using temporal language that implies very clearly that there is no opportunity for going anywhere for a couple of years. Let me just read those 2 lines. And when 8 days were completed, and when the days for their purification according to the law of Moses were completed, they brought him to Jerusalem. 8 days are finished, go straight to Jerusalem. That's very clear. So there's no opportunity to go to Egypt from here, right? And when 8 days, this is really, really super clear. 8 days have been completed, go to Jerusalem. Okay, what happens after Jerusalem? And when his parents had completed everything in accordance with the law of the Lord, i.e. the circumcision and the sacrifices. So when his parents had completed everything in accordance with the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. And when they had completed these tasks, they returned to Galilee. Can you get, in that reading, either before Jerusalem or after Jerusalem, can you get 2 years in Egypt being chased away by the murderous king? No. The language is super clear. And it's not only super clear in terms of the chronology going on there, it's super clear that they are returning to Nazareth in Luke, and that they are going to Nazareth in Matthew for the first time. This is yet another massive example Very, very clear example of how these two accounts are not reconcilable. In fact, when I debated Lydia McGrew, apologist, on and I debated her on Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio, I think it was last Christmas or the one before. When I debated her, this was a weakness, and I don't think she had an adequate answer. Well, I don't think there's any adequate answer for any problems. But what she was always appealing to is this thing, possibilita ergo probabilita. Well, this could have happened. This might have happened. Here, you're like, yeah, but it might be that Jesus could spend 2 years in Egypt. You could, yeah, like it's conceivable that Luke's just forgotten to, like I can imagine that that's not logically impossible that Luke could forget to mention or could on purpose not mention Herod and going to Egypt for 2 years and use language that implies that definitely never happened. I mean, it's logically possible, but it's utterly implausible. It's unfeasible. Like, we're talking about probabilities. It's like a minuscule probability, like an infinitesimally small probability that that's actually the case. So you're not rational in believing that that is the case. I can say unicorns might exist. They could exist. I mean, we can conceive of what a unicorn is, and there might be unicorns either in this world or in the universe. Well, yeah, there might be. But am I rational in believing that they do exist? No, I'm not. So that's an irrational position to hold. It is irrational for you to hold that these two accounts are harmonizable in the census in general, but particularly in this sojourn in Egypt for 2 years or for however long it is. It's just not harmonizable with what is written in the Gospel of Luke. This is terminal. These two accounts are contradictory. Here is a super obvious example of how they're contradictory. Don't tell me that these accounts are one coherent story. Don't tell me that, because it ain't true, right? You need to come and argue this with me. Like I did a video last night about, hey, my channel's monetized. Thank you very much. Very sincere, like that. Truly, thank you. And there was a Christian commenter on there that said, hey, do you want to debate? Yeah, let's have a discussion. I don't think debates are useful. I think they're just rhetorical devices, rhetorical events where whoever has the best rhetoric wins. Let's discuss. And I'll tell you what, if you want to discuss something, let's discuss the Nativity. And if you want to discuss something in the Nativity, discuss how Luke's very clear returning to Nazareth straight away after 8 days to Nazareth from Bethlehem, let's discuss how that is supposedly harmonizable with Jesus being chased away to Egypt for 2 years. You ain't going to win that. Let's discuss that. Anyway, thank you. I'm starting to rant. You can see I'm starting to rant because, man, the Nativity is just chock full of absolute terminal issues for gospel inerrancy and harmonization. So I'm starting to rant. I do apologize. Come on, bring it back together, Pierce. Sort it out. Thanks for watching. If you've got this far, please like, subscribe, click the bell, do anything, all that stuff. All the details for buying my books, my PayPal, anything like that is in the description below. Thank you. Really, it's, as ever, question everything, particularly yourselves, especially if you believe things like two completely different stories being harmonizable. You know, I'd definitely question yourself on that one. But, yeah. Cheers, then. Until next time. Goodbye.